session was for parents, carers and parent groups, and the information session is going to be delivered by Enquire, who is Scotland's advice service for additional support for learning. And they are going to be talking about additional support for learning legislation. They're going to be talking about the rights of children and young people and their parents and carers, and also where to go for support, advice and information. And they'll set out their national role in supporting children and families and professionals. So I'm just about to hand you over. I'm just checking that I've covered everything off here in my notes. So I would like to hand you over to Hannah Gray and Ellen Morton. And I would just like to say, on behalf of Connect, and I'm sure all the people who are on this session with me tonight are very grateful for your time this evening and coming along to share all the information that you're about Enquire. So I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Diane, and as well for us, thank you so much to Connect for inviting us along to this session where we can explain about Enquire and additional support for learning. So my name is Hannah and I'm a Senior Advice and Information Officer at Enquire. I've been here for over 8.5 years now, so I've spoken to many parents and families, young people and professionals about additional support for learning. And then a bit before I started at Enquire, I was actually a young person with additional support needs who had most of my experience of learning from the Edinburgh Sick Kids Hospital, including sitting my exams. So I have quite a lot of my own experience of the system. And I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Ellen, and I'll let them introduce themselves now.
Hi, thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I'm Ellen. I'm an information and advice officer with Enquire, and I've been working at Enquire since January. Before that, I worked for 4 years as a primary school teacher, directly supporting children and young people with additional support needs. So, yeah.
Thanks, Ellen. So we'll just do a very brief run through of the aims of this evening, because Dan's already done a great job of already covering most of that for us. But as she said, today we'll be talking about additional support for learning legislation, the rights of children and young people and their parents and carers, and where to go for support, advice and information. As Connect mentioned, we're going to have time for questions at the end of this session, and may also answer some specific questions, you know, if it's related to the slides as we go along. But if there's something more specific, or you're looking for more detail on a kind of individual situation for you and your family or your child, we do recommend getting in touch via the helpline. I'll share details of how to do that in a minute. I will warn you that after events like this, we sometimes suddenly get loads more inquiries, and we're quite a wee team. So do continue to keep trying if you're finding it hard to get through, or you know, you might struggle if you phone at exactly 9:30 tomorrow morning. But do keep on trying, and we have lots of other ways of kind of connecting and getting advice from us. We know some of you will be here from parents groups, parent councils, or maybe as individual parents of children with ASN, or have multiple different hats on, as often we do. We'll mainly direct our information to parents and carers, because that's kind of how the Additional Support for Learning Act works, and where kind of the rights are to individual children. But we are going to get Connect to kind of link that through into what parent councils can be doing. And hopefully for all of you, it'll give you something, some information you can share, even if some parts don't directly apply to yourselves. All right. So very briefly about us. Hopefully you've already heard of Enquire, but if not, we are the Scottish Advice Service for Additional Support for Learning, and we've existed for more than 20 years. I think this year is our 25th birthday. We are funded by the Scottish Government to provide independent advice and information to children and young people, parents, carers and professionals about children's rights and the legislation. We do this through... Oh, no worries, yeah, we're on to the next page. It's perfect. Thank you. We do this in lots of different ways. So first off, we have our 2 websites, which enquire.org.uk is the first one, and it's designed to help parents, carers and professionals to find out more about children's rights. And we also have our website reach.scot, which is for children and young people. You can also get in touch, as I mentioned, via our website, via our website, we have a contact form and web form. We also have web chat, and we also have our helpline on 0345 123 2303. So variety of ways to get in touch with us. And we also do events like this. The kind of key way to kind of keep aware of upcoming events and other information is through our social media. And we also have a bi-monthly newsletter, which we use to send out information on recent news and additional support for learning, highlight any new information that we've got, and highlight upcoming events. So it's worth a follow to that, and we'll share those links. Next slide, Diane. Fantastic. So as most of you today are parents and carers or representing parent groups, I wanted to highlight particularly the parents and carers section of our website, as it's the key place to start off if you need information or advice. It's aimed to be really practical and give you ideas on what you can say and do in situations that we hear about on helpline regularly. So it's split into kind of all the key main areas we hear about on the helpline. So you've got nursery and starting school, getting support in place, including things like identifying and planning support. Big section on attendance and exclusion, covering things like part-time timetables, children missing school due to anxiety-related absence, moving and choosing schools, so issues that covers kind of the key advice around perhaps if you're concerned that your child isn't in the right school and you're looking at placing requests, support after 16 and leaving school, and also we have a section on working with the school and solving problems, which covers the kind of main steps you can take if you're unhappy with what's going on at school. All of the website has accessibility tools where you can change language or use overlays, text to speech. So it can be a really kind of helpful place to start, and people often find there's a lot of answers there that they maybe aren't aware of. So it's always useful. And I wanted to highlight it today because I know it's 8:15 on a Tuesday evening and there's a lot to take in tonight. So what I would reassure you is that what we say is also covered on the website and much more. So just as Diane said, there's no need to take notes, and don't panic if this doesn't all go in. It's lit. Next slide. And just a wee bit more about reach.scot. So that's our website for young people. It covers many of the same issues as our parent carers and professionals website, but is written with and for young people. I wanted to mention it here really because as well as it being a resource for your young person, we've also been hearing more and more that parents and carers and professionals have been finding it useful to open up conversations and find the language to talk to their young person about things at school or their rights. For example, it has pages on what to expect as a young person going to a planning meeting and tips on how to prepare for a planning meeting as a young person, and that's written by our inclusion ambassadors. So it can be a really helpful tool as well for families and kind of something to show your young person. And final slide for me at the moment is just on My Rights, My Say, which is a part which we are part of as Enquire. It's a service that provides support to young people aged 12 to 15 with additional support needs to exercise their rights and their rights under additional support for learning law. And at Enquire, we provide the information and advice side of that service, but it also includes a free advocacy service, legal service, and a gathering views service. So it's quite a big other topic, but I just wanted to make you all aware that that is there. And you can read more about it on our website, on Reach, and at myrightsmysay.scot. And it's another resource for if you're supporting or you have a 12 to 15-year-old with additional support needs that you might want to consider. Now, well, I've told you what we do and how we do it, but I want to pass on to Ellen to explain a bit more about the laws and guidance we advise on.
Thanks a lot, Hannah. So when we're talking about additional support, we always try and start with and always try and base everything we do in children's rights. So although we're mostly going to be focusing on children's rights around support at school, it's important to not acknowledge that children have a whole host of rights that are protected by a number of different pieces of legislation. This includes the right to an education, the right to have their views heard, and rights under the newly incorporated United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. We're going to be focusing on additional support for learning today, so it's important to know the laws around additional support for learning only apply to children who are attending local authority schools or nurseries, or who have a place at a different school, but it's funded by their local authority. So that means that if your child goes to an independent school, or if your child is home educated, then the additional support for learning legislation that we're going to talk about doesn't apply to them or to your situation. But we do have some specific fact sheets about independent schools and about home education that are on our website, which I would encourage you to check out if that's your situation. And you might also find some of the other information in this presentation, like the part we'll come on to about working with schools and things like that, helpful anyway for you and your family. So just to let you know about that. The next slide, please. So as well as your child's rights, it's also important to acknowledge that parents and carers also have rights themselves. So in the context of additional support for learning legislation that we're talking about today, some of the most relevant rights to be aware of as parents and as carers of individual children are your right to share your views about your child's education, your views about your child's support, and also to have those views taken into account and taken on board when decisions are being made. You also have the right to have a supporter or an advocate with you at any meetings with the school. And this is quite broad. This can be anyone that you like, really. It could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be somebody from your local carer centre, or it could also be a professional advocate advocating for you. You also have the right to ask for your child's needs to be assessed, and you also have the right to ask for something called a coordinated support plan, or CSP. This is a specific type of learning plan that is protected by law. And I guess lastly, you have the right to ask that your local authority place your child in a different school. So that's called making a placing request. And yeah, that's another right you have as a parent or a carer. Connect will talk a little bit later on about where parent councils sit in this and the kind of roles they play as well. Next slide. Yeah. So next we're going to cover the foundations of what does additional support for learning actually mean and what does it actually look like. And again, this is something you can learn a lot more about and read a lot more about on our website later on if that's something you would like to do. So additional support for learning legislation sets out how schools and nurseries must provide support for children who have something called additional support needs. A child has additional support needs where, for whatever reason, they cannot benefit from a school education without some extra help. So as you can see, this is a really broad definition. Anything really that's impacting on your child's ability to learn, whether that be something long-term or something short-term, can be considered an additional support need. And on the next slide here, we have some examples. Like I said, the definition is needing support for whatever reason. So the examples here are just a selection, and they are by no means the only ones that would count as having additional support needs. But hopefully you can just see from the example here that additional support needs can really cover so many things that might impact on your child's ability to make the most of their time at school. It's also really important to note that this definition of additional support needs does not include needing a diagnosis. While, of course, assessing children's needs and understanding more about them and more about their needs can be a really important and really valuable part of planning their support, but at the same time, it's just good to remember your child does not need a diagnosis to be entitled to support. They're entitled to support whether they have that or not. It's also important to remember that your child might have multiple reasons why they need support. and that these needs sometimes can cross over. So for example, if a child is maybe being bullied at school, this is something that the school must address, of course, and try and stop any bullying behaviours. But at the same time, being bullied might increase a child's mental health needs, or it might mean that they're refusing to attend school, and these needs also must be addressed. Next slide. So the duty to provide additional support for learning actually falls to the local authority. So that's the education department at your local council. In practice, it's usually the schools who do a lot of planning and providing of support to children on behalf of the local authority. The law says that local authorities must make adequate and efficient provision of support. That includes they must identify children's needs, they must plan their support, and they must keep that support under review. Next slide. So I guess quite a big question, what do we mean by identifying needs? Your local authority has to provide support that meets your child's needs. And the first step in that process is to understand what those additional support needs might be. Identifying needs can be very simple, things like your child's class teacher, observing them at school and recognizing some extra things they might need in order to learn. For example, a child with glasses might be better to able to engage in the lesson if they sit a bit closer to the board. Identifying needs is all about recognizing any potential barriers to your child's learning so that the support can be put in place to reduce those barriers or to remove those barriers. Identifying a child's needs should also include listening to your child and also to you as their parent or carer. You and your child both have the right to have your view heard and taken into account as part of planning. Again, this can be very informal. It can be discussions at the classroom door at the end of the day. It can be a quick email exchange if something's happened over the weekend that would be helpful for the school to know about maybe. It can also be much more formal, things like a child's planning meeting or a team around the child meetings where you and the school and your child as well, if they want to, kind of set aside time and place to discuss concerns and to agree a way to move forward. Sometimes identifying needs can also include formal assessment or seeking some kind of diagnosis. If you or the school maybe, for example, suspect that your child has dyslexia or they are autistic, if your child's school are maybe unsure how to support them, they should be asking for further advice and assessment. Depending on the need, this might include contacting other professionals, like getting educational psychology involved or getting CAMS involved. That's the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. But again, remember, as a parent or carer, you also have the right to request that your child's needs are assessed. So you can do that by talking to the school and asking them to assess your child's needs, or you can also do that by contacting your local authority directly and asking for an assessment of your child's needs. Next slide. So once a child's needs have been assessed, their support should be planned to address their needs. However, it's important to remember that planning is an ongoing process. Your child's support is something that needs to be regularly reviewed. If your child's needs change, their support should change as well. This includes planning for short-term and for long-term needs. So, for example, a child with dyslexia might need certain support all the way through school, but they might also need different support in the short term, for example, if they sprain their wrist or if they face a bereavement at home. That's why it's always important to try and maintain really good relationship and communication with your child's school or nursery so that your child's support can adapt as it needs to. All children at school will have some kind of personal learning planning. So for some children, more formalized support is needed, particularly if they maybe have multiple needs or complex needs. Planning can be very different in different situations. It doesn't necessarily need to be written down, but at the same time, having a written support plan can sometimes be helpful. This is something that you can talk to your child's school about if you think your child would benefit from it. Each local authority arranges support plans slightly differently, and there's lots of different names of different types of support plan that the local authority can put in place. But I guess what's most important is that your child is getting the support they need, and the name of the plan or what kind of plan they have is quite often less important, and what's most important is what's actually in that plan and what the school and you have agreed you can do to help support your child. Next slide.
Ellen, I was just going to jump into that because we just had one question that someone asked,
Go for it.
what is a child's planning meeting? And I think that kind of just follows on from what you saying, in a way that so different local authorities will have different ways of planning a child's support. And one of the kind of common ways is some sort of child planning meeting, and your school may have a different way that they generally do child planning meetings, or they might call them a bit different things, but basically it's some sort of regular review meeting that's discussing how your child's getting on, what support's in place, and reviewing kind of what's happening, and if that's kind of should continue, putting in some targets. So we talk about them quite commonly because they're often called that, but they do have different names. I also just saw a wee question about how regularly they should be. Generally how regularly planning meetings should be. Again, there's not one set guidance on this thing that says this is when we have to have a meeting, but it is about what's kind of right for that young person and the level of intervention and support that they need, and when would make sense. So whether that's termly, or if there's something that's kind of, there's a crisis situation, it might be more regularly. I don't know if there was anything more you wanted to add on child planning meetings, Ellen, before I let you go on.
No, that's great. Yeah. No, I think you covered it all there, Hannah. And yeah, they might not be called that, but I guess what's important for us is just the chance for everyone to come together, for the parents and the child if they want to, and the school, and to kind of look at how are things going basically, and do we need different support? Is the support going well? Are they meeting the targets? Those kind of questions. Yeah. Great. So additional support at school can mean lots of different things, and it can look quite different. There's a few examples here on this slide of what support might look like, although this is by no means the only way that support can be provided. As we said, support must be based on a child's individual needs, and the planning for support should include the families and the child themselves as far as possible, as we said. As we've already mentioned, needs can change and support can change too. Sometimes children will just need different support in different subjects, or sometimes children will need different support at different times in their lives. For example, some children will need different support or more support when changing schools. Reviewing support is a key part of the planning process. You'll see that some of these supports here on this slide are things that the school can put in place or try quite quickly and quite easily without needing a lot of extra resources, while other support mentioned here might require the school maybe speaking to specialists or arranging some assessments. But sometimes the smallest changes can make a big difference. So asking your child's school about how they can help is always a really good place to start. They might have expertise in what has worked for other children, and with this expertise and with you and your child's knowledge about what works for them and what they find difficult, you might be able to find something together that helps. Things can get moving quicker, or things can improve while you're maybe waiting for input for other services or the other things that maybe take a bit longer to get in place. So yeah, we always recommend just speaking to your child's school first and seeing what kind of support they can offer. Next slide. So while we're mostly focusing on additional support for learning today, I just also wanted to quickly mention the Getting It Right for Every Child framework. It's sometimes called the GIRFEC framework. And this is really designed to help schools support the well-being of their pupils. It also sets out the Shinari indicators. And again, both of these here are just the first letters of Getting It Right for Every Child. And this is just the first letters of all of these words here. I know there's a lot of jargon sometimes in the education world, but these Shinari indicators, they basically just set out what schools should be doing to kind of think about and to keep track of a child's well-being. So your child at school should be safe, healthy, achieving, nurtured, active, respected, responsible, and included. But these Shinari indicators can actually be quite helpful to use when you're talking to the school, because they can help you to focus in the conversation on particular areas. So for example, if your child is maybe dealing with bullying, then you could focus on how the school can make sure they are being safe and included. Or if your child is maybe struggling with exams and grades, you could use this to ask the school, how are you making sure that they are achieving? Either with getting more academic support, or maybe it's about building a sense of achievement in other parts of school life too. So it can just be a really useful framework to use when you're talking to the school. Yeah, I'm going to pass back to Hannah now to talk a little bit about what we can do if there's problems and how we can work with the school to improve support.
Thank you, Ellen. I need to find my slides again because I was getting involved in the chat there and stop listening because there's some really good conversations and questions that I'm hopeful some of what we cover now will help with some of these questions that I've seen come up, but also we can maybe get a bit more into them in the time for questions at the end. So what I guess we wanted to acknowledge is that a lot of the time families get in touch with us is when they're worried about something happening or not happening at school, and you're not feeling heard and you're concerned about your child. Sadly, no one tends to phone us to say their child's had a lovely day at school. I mean, if you want to, that would be a nice bit of light in the day for me and Ellen, but obviously that's the reason that people are getting in touch with us, and it's often around kind of that communication breakdown. You're not feeling that trust with the school, or you're not feeling heard in the worries that you have. So one of our key bits of advice we often start with is around building, maintaining, and possibly if needed, rebuilding a relationship with your child's school so that you can work with them to get the right support in place. There are loads of ways that you can do this, or support the parents in the groups that you're within to do this, but here are some of the I want to cover some of the kind of top tips that we talk about on the helpline around this. So firstly, it's that kind of important thing to remember that you as a parent are one of the experts in your child's needs and in your child's learning. You can think about this in two ways. Firstly, that you are an expert on your child, you know them well, you know what works for them at home, what they might have told you about school that they maybe don't tell school, and wait till they come home to express to you. And you often hear how they're feeling much more than at school. Sharing this insight with the school can help to build a support plan that will work for your child and their individual needs. The second way to think about this is also that you are one of the experts, but not the only one. So, your child and your child's teacher are also part of that picture, as well as the school additional support for learning lead, any other professionals that are working with your child. They all have their own expertise and understanding that you can make the most of to get this plan right in school. So you can ask them for their professional advice for what they've done with other pupils in the school in the past, what they've noticed about what they're seeing in the school environment for your child. And getting that support in place can and should be a team effort. And I know that can be really tricky when things have got difficult and fraught, but sometimes moving back to that conversation can be really helpful. And as I've already mentioned, I think Ellen's mentioned, you and your child have a right to be heard in decisions about their support. You and your child's school should find ways to communicate that work for both and everyone, so that you can work well together. It can help to ask the school actually just how would they like you to communicate with them? Do emails actually work better than a chat at the end of the day? How do they normally do, as we've been discussing, child planning meetings? So rather going in and saying you're not having one, it's like, well, how do you do them? How do they work? But also, that said, you can also communicate what works for you in communicating with the school, what works best, what would help you feel heard and keep them up to date with what's going on at home, or that might be affecting their education. For example, if you prefer emails to phone calls, you can ask for that. Really, it's about, if possible, working together as a team in a way that finds the right support that will suit and the right kind of picture that will suit everyone. We have loads of resources on this we can share, and something we kind of talk regularly about and often find kind of getting, preparing for meetings, writing down, or emailing in advance what you would like to discuss, asking for that clarification, asking for minutes of meetings, or minutes of meetings aren't happening, even just sending a follow-up email saying, I've understood this is what we've agreed. These can obviously be helpful ways, even if you've been to multiple meetings before, to kind of reframe and see if you can get things moving and working with the school again. However, we do know that sometimes things don't go to plan, or problems arise. When that happens, there are steps available to individual parents under the Additional Support for Learning laws and legislation, and some for wider issues that you can take to parent councils that I'll get Diane to explain a bit more about later. Firstly, as a first step, we always recommend asking for, can we move on to the next slide, actually, Diane? Oh, yeah, we go. So firstly, we always recommend asking for a meeting with the school. Again, as a starting point. Like I've just mentioned, talking things through with the school, whether that's the class teacher, the person responsible for additional support for learning. It's often kind of the next step if things aren't moving, or even the head teacher, if you need to escalate things further. Starting with that conversation, the school are the people that day to day are providing support for your child. So it's often best, if possible, to start with them, as they're often best positioned to actually make change and adapt plans quickly. Also, it helps if they're aware, if something's been going on a while, but actually, are they aware currently that you're concerned and got concerns about what's happening, before you start to take any other steps. Now, similar to this, one really helpful route can be that either reviewing the written support plan that's already in place for your child or asking for a new plan. Sometimes actually getting things in writing and spending some time with the school, putting that plan together, can help everyone feel more confident that your child's needs are understood and steps are being taken to get the right support in place. As Ella mentioned, each local authority arranges plans slightly differently, but you can ask your school what type of plan they think will work best for your child and their needs. Or if they say they don't normally do planning or your child doesn't meet the criteria, it's a conversation about, well, what is another way where we can set out, what do we all understand my child's needs are? How are they going to be met? What's the goals of that support, and how will we know if it's working? And that foundation can often be quite helpful in getting things moving. But following that, there are further ways to escalate your concerns. So you can put things in writing to the teacher or the head teacher. That can be another way to move things forward. It also gives you a bit of a written paper trail. And then beyond this, you also have the right to contact your local authority directly. You can do this to not only request an assessment of needs that we mentioned earlier, but you can also contact them to discuss any concerns you have about your child's support or about the school. If you think of it, it's your head teacher and then the local authority are the kind of next step above that. They are technically the ones that are legally responsible for your child's education and support under the Additional Support for Learning Act. As Ella mentioned, it's their duty to identify your child's needs and offer support. So that means you can reach out to them if you've taken the other steps with the school, but things still haven't changed. We always recommend making sure that you have gone through those steps with the school, because the first thing the local authority are probably going to do is go and have a chat with the school. So if they don't know that you're kind of at that point, it just means, you've got this kind of written record of where you've gone before, and then that's kind of helping start that conversation that, it has reached the point where we need the local authority to be involved. We have the contact information for all the local authorities on our website. Don't know if I've shared that with Connect, but Ellen can probably put a wee link into them. And then, as I think we're on to the next slide already. Oh, no, back in. There are then steps beyond the local authority, just speaking to the local authority, additional support for learning contact. So there is independent mediation for additional support for learning, which is where someone completely independent of yourselves as families, parents, and the local authority facilitates meetings to try and agree way forward in a child's best interests, and that's something you can request. There is also the formal complaints route within the council, and then beyond that we get into independent adjudication. Some things can go to the Additional Support Needs Tribunal, and there's also the option of a Section 70 complaint. Those last three are quite kind of specific in what you can take to each one, depending on situation. So I'm not going to go into them all right now, because I feel it's a bit of information overload, but we have kind of individual fact sheets on each of those, as well as mediation and contacts for your mediation provider that you can find on our website, or you can ring us if you're reaching that stage to kind of chat through what's the kind of next stage. But what I'd reassure you is there are further steps if you're feeling that things are not moving for your child. And all these are rights about your kind of individual child's needs. So if you're unhappy that their needs are not being met, but it's important to remember that what we also have, and many of you are here from, is we have parent councils that also fit into this picture. So I'm going to pass back to Diane to cover a little bit more about parent councils.
Okay, thank you so much, Hannah. And sorry, I did jump forward a couple of times in the slide. I was trying to guess where you were going, so apologies for jumping back and forth for a couple of those. But yeah, just to say, obviously, as I said at the start, Connect are an organisation that offers support to parent groups and parent councils who are members of our organisation. So there's lots of things that a parent group or a parent council can do to support children and families looking at additional support needs and additional support for learning. So some of these activities could include having an additional support learning subcommittee within your parent group, looking specifically at issues around inclusion, equity, disability, and additional support for learning. It's really helpful and I think important if you can have a parent council representative who does have a child with additional support for learning needs to hear those kind of diverse views and so that these are represented within the parent group. You could also have additional support for learning on the agenda of your parent council as a standing item, so that there is an open discussion that involves the head teacher, and there's that kind of ongoing kind of communication and collaboration and partnership between the parent group and parents in the wider school and the education staff, including the senior leadership team. You could work with the school to set up an informal support group for parents of children with additional support needs, and also this information that you're going to receive tonight, you can share widely amongst your whole school community, and even as a minimal, just raising awareness of the work of Enquire and any other support agencies that's on their website or the ones that they've recommended tonight. And again, you can also spread the word about Connect as an organisation supporting parent councils. And just helping families to understand and use their rights. That's really, really important. Working with the school to provide information and training, so you can set that up. We often hear about parent councils who just go out on their own and approach organisations and groups within their local community or even national organisations to come in and do a workshop or a presentation for parents and community members, or you can do that in collaboration with the school and the head teacher. It's just important to note that a parent council is not a kind of advocacy service for individual parents. So the parent council wouldn't respond to individual parents coming with issues. The parent council is about representing the majority of the parents and carers within a school community. So they would take forward the broad issue of disability, equity, inclusion, additional support needs, additional support for learning, those sort of things, and look at policies and look at working in partnership and collaborating with the school community rather than being an individual advocate for a family. But they can signpost families, hopefully, if you've got a good set of information there to give to families. So what I'll do is, because I see the time's ticking on, it's been a great session in terms of giving the information, and I can see that some of the questions in the chat have been answered. I know that my colleague Tina has been trying to capture some of those questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll ask Tina if she's able to kind of summarise or pull together some of those questions, and she'll put them to yourselves, Hannah and Ellen, to answer. And if there are any other questions, now is the time to do it. So please add them in and we'll try and pull them together, and Hannah and Ellen will try and answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. I think Hannah and Ellen have been working valiantly at picking up the questions, and I think have gone back and picked up some of the ones as we've gone along. I think I had on my list the question about gifted children, but I think Hannah's gone and provided a link and a bit more information for that.
I mean, I can reiterate, Tina, just that the reason that the Additional Support for Learning Act the key thing is that it covers any child who needs more or different support to benefit fully from their education, and support should help, education should help a child reach their fullest potential. There's two different education laws there, might combine them, but the key message is that, if your child needs additional support to get the most from their learning, that can absolutely include highly able pupils, or what we kind of put in there as gifted children, because if they need more to reach their potential, then they have a right to support.
So there were, I think, I had kind of 5 comments, which I know you've picked up or touched on some of them, but somebody asked at the beginning who judges whether the local authority offering is adequate or not. And I guess adequate is not the right word. It's whether it meets the needs of the child, and who judges that, which I guess is a question about relationships with the school, and which is something others have asked about. If you're feeling that your school is unresponsive or is not listening, what should you do next? I think that hopefully picks up what some of the things that Pauline was asking about.
Do you want to start, Ellen? I know I've heard me already.
Yeah, I think if you've really tried with the school, you've had multiple meetings with them, and you just feel that you're not getting anywhere, or perhaps it's that things that are agreed in meetings and are written down in support plans then end up not happening, and you just feel like you're going back and forth with the school and back and forth and back and forth, and nothing's improving. It is important to know that there are further steps you can take, and there are ways that you can kind of advocate for your child and make sure that that law that we spoke about, that they have a right to the support they need to get the most out of their education, to make sure that actually gets put into practice, and to make sure that they're able to realize those rights. So I guess, Hannah did talk about lots of different options, but we would always say the first one, if you've really tried everything with the school, is to make sure you've met with the head teacher of the school, I guess, first. Quite often you can be speaking to a class teacher or the head of additional support. So the first would be to really put your concerns in writing to the head teacher and just say, look, I'm really unhappy with how things are progressing. I think my child maybe needs more or different support, and we've had lots of meetings, but this just isn't being put in place. I'm really concerned. When can we expect to see a change? If after that and you're still feeling like you're not getting anything from the school, the next step would be to take that to the local authority. So I shared a link on the chat there, which had the additional support for learning contact details for each local authority. So that's a specific person usually who works for the local authority that we would recommend getting in touch with, and really discussing the situation and seeing if they can help, because legally the duty for your child's education and support it's provided by the local authority, and they just do that through the school. So that's a kind of further step. I don't know, Hannah, if you have
I've just got to maybe I understand the frustration in a way with the adequate and efficient support can sometimes feel such a vague phrase. Like, in reality, what on earth does that mean? And I think the one thing to know is the reason it's like that is because it should be based on your child's individual needs. And one of the things that you can be going back to is saying to the school, well, how do you feel? Can you explain to me why you feel this is adequate and efficient support for my child? And you can set out maybe how you don't feel it's adequate. If we're thinking about, does it meet their needs under Shinari? Is it providing them, with the kind of goals of general education? And there's wording around that. And sometimes that can be a way to start the question. And efficient does have a little bit of cost. They shouldn't be sending your child to the other side of Scotland if they can meet their needs locally. But it also says that cost can't be the primary consideration in the law. So there is conversations, and often I think actually coming back to well, what are we deciding? Can we talk about what the targets and goals are for my child? What's their fullest potential, do we think, at the moment? And what do the school feel or the local authority feel is adequate? And there is ways, kind of as Ellen said, further up the system, if you continued to feel that adequate support wasn't happening. Yeah.
So there was specific
lots of questions are coming in. So
I know they're flowing thick and fast. I'll try and kind of round them up if I can. There was a very specific question about how often should a child's plan or learning support plan be reviewed.
Yeah, so there's not a kind of, unless it's a coordinated support plan, there isn't a specific piece of it doesn't say exactly, but it's really about coming to that agreement with the individual school, and kind of speaking about, well, what are the targets and when can we actually know, you know, obviously meeting every week isn't going to be helpful if there's not any time to review what's in place. But you know, often we're looking at termly, but it isn't set down in law. But you know, it's about having a conversation about that kind of communication and as it works. I can see a few other ones. I don't know if there's any other specific ones that might be useful. I can see there's maybe one around kind of, I know there's one where someone's asking about what options are there for autistic young people who are not managing to cope with school. And maybe we can talk a bit about that in terms of kind of generally young people struggling to attend, and what advice we give there. Ellen, might be one you could cover.
Yeah, so children and young people continue to have a right to an education, even if they're struggling to attend school for either a short-term or a long-term period. So this covers a whole host of different children that maybe have medical health needs and maybe need to spend some time in hospital or at home recovering. It also includes children and young people with mental health needs who are maybe struggling to come to school because of anxiety or other mental health needs, or the whole other host of reasons that children maybe aren't able to attend school physically for a period of time. But what's really important to remember is that they still continue to have a right to an education, and the school should really think about how that can be provided for that individual child. Again, like we said, the law is very broad, and the kind of support they can receive is very broad, and it should be really targeted to that child and what would work for them. So for some young people, that would mean taking part in online learning and accessing their education digitally. For some young people, that would mean having access to an interrupted learner service or a visiting teacher service that would come and work with them for a couple of hours a week. For some young people, that might mean using hospital education services. And for some people, it's the actual school building, which is very anxiety inducing. So they can go to a local library or a community centre or other area and kind of continue their education from there. For some young people, it will be supported to prepare for exams at home, and that they would then maybe do those exams at a different setting. So really for every young person and every child, it might look a little bit different. But the important thing is to remember that just because they're not physically able to attend school doesn't mean that they lose their right to an education, or doesn't mean they lose their right to support. They still have all of those rights as long as they're enrolled, you know, still in the school. They continue to have those rights. And again, it's really about having a conversation with the school. How can you support us, and how can you support my child to make sure that they're continuing to access their education? What might that look like? What have other children maybe in the local authority used? Would online learning work for them? Would sending work home work for them? And really just looking at what would work for that specific child, a young person.
There's one question which I think has come twice, and which is about CAMS, which I know is the health service. It's not to do with education, and whether there's a mechanism for appealing. I know you can lodge formal complaints with the NHS, and there's a procedure around that. Whether, depending on the age of your child, whether you can actually be in touch with them directly. I wouldn't imagine so, but I don't know, unless you might think that there's a kind of extreme high risk or child protection type concern. And somebody else is asking about cuts and what should be done about that. They're getting rid of learning basis or whatever. That would be, for me, that would be a political issue. That would be about going to the Director of Education of the local authority and ask how your child's needs are going to be met as a result of these cuts. and also going to local counsellors and asking them to help you find out what will the provision be if the learning bases are valued and useful and effective for some young people, and if they're going to be cut, or any other service is going to be cut that young people use and need, what will replace it and how will those needs be met. So I think that is escalate beyond the school and escalate to your local elected councillors, several of them usually. I've tried to pick up some of these ones about these bases being closed, and
I think there's been a few questions around, quite a bit, as Tina said as well. There'll be some things where, especially, it's quite hard within the additional support for learning if it's a proposed cut, because basically the routes within the Additional Support for Learning Act are all like when something's happened, they're kind of about your child now. But you can, exactly as Tina said, be saying, well, if this is going to change, how else are you offering to meet my child's needs? Where they are. And the same, anytime kind of support has changed, you should be involved in discussions about your child's support. So whether it's a small change or a big change, it's a conversation about, well, if we're removing that, we've already identified that this was meeting their needs. Can you explain how else those needs are going to be met? Can often be a helpful route. And I know there's a few questions around kind of school placements and bases. I'm also really aware that actually a lot of the decisions around any of your placing requests you'll be just hearing back from that, and I know it can be an incredibly tough time. We have a lot of information in our section around choosing and moving school that I think would answer a number of the questions that are in there around how to appeal, or if perhaps I did see someone saying that they were closing the base that they put in the placing request to, so it's like where do we appeal to? I'd suggest in that one that it is a bit more complicated. I would suggest it might still be in that situation worth speaking to Govan Law Centre, who give support on making an appeal to the Additional Support Needs Tribunal if that was a parental placing request that you made, because that's quite a unique situation, because I guess you could then at least have a conversation about, well, if not this school, where else can you meet my child's needs? But there's quite a few different variables with where you can take a placing request on, depending on how you made it. So that page on our website really breaks it down really well, because I know it's a complicated area, and will hopefully give you a bit of starter advice in kind of raising those concerns and topics. And you can ring us if you kind of need to break things down a bit more.
And I think it's fair to say, is it not, that for a placing request, you've got to go through all the steps, the appealing, and you've got to follow the local authority steps to see where you end up. And I was involved in some in Edinburgh some years ago now, but if you kept at it, you were likely to be successful. They assume people will fall away and be exhausted by the process. So
I think it depends on, what I would suggest is wherever kind of there's placement issues, one of the things we always advise is keep, even when it's difficult, really keep working together with the school that is being proposed for your child, in case you don't get the outcome you're hoping for. Also, as well as kind of popping in any appeals, there is some other routes that you can still be having conversations about, well, if you're recommending this school to my child, how do you feel you could meet their needs there? And you can use mediation, which can be another route to a kind of quicker result and a quicker conversation as well. So there is kind of various different things to weigh up if you're in that situation. That certainly that page kind of weighs up your options and helps you if you are kind of if you have reached that kind of decision making.
Can we take one last question, which is, who does the assessment of needs if a young person is not attending high school and is in autistic burnout?
I mean, in terms of, sorry, Hannah. Well, go ahead.
I was passing it to you anyway, Ellen. No,
yeah. In terms of an assessment of needs, it really depends exactly what that assessment is going to look like. So for sometimes you maybe you suspect your child is dyslexic, you ask for an assessment of needs. That would be an educational psychologist that would probably do a dyslexia assessment for them. For another child, it might be about kind of speaking to their class teacher and looking at some of their work and understanding what their needs might be. So it's not one specific thing that happens when you ask for an assessment of needs. There can be different specialists involved, quite often educational psychologists, sometimes speech and language, various people. If a young person is out of school, their needs should still be assessed. If they're not able to attend school because of burnout, they should still be able to do an assessment. It might just mean that it looks a little bit different. It involves maybe phone conversations, online conversations, the parent going to meetings, maybe even people coming to the house to observe. Really just depends what that assessment is and what they're kind of, what they can do to allow that to happen while your young person's at home. I don't know, Hannah, if you have anything else to say on that.
No, I think it is quite law. Again, the law isn't saying this is the assessment that's required for this need. But yeah, again, as already said, it's about having that conversation with the school and their expertise. But you could also go down the route, there is an assessment you think might be helpful. For example, you might want to speak to Scottish Autism and have a conversation with them. If you kind of together come to actually this type of assessment would be useful, it could be something that you could put in. You have the right to put a request in for that type of assessment. Whether they say yes is different, but it would start that conversation and open that door to that conversation.
So it's stick with asking the school, isn't it?
So I think initially, but you do have the right, I think it's always starting at that point, because what will, my thought is always that, in terms of saving your energy, if you can agree that with the school, but also if you are then taking another step, the first thing that's going to usually happen if you escalate is there's going to be a conversation at the school level. So if you feel like you've gone through that paper trail and you've really given them that opportunity, then it makes the next step a lot less frustrating and a lot less kind of saving of your energy. And obviously, fingers crossed things are resolved at school level, but I think always starting there, because it just makes things a wee bit easier if you then do have to go up that there's not a teacher going, oh, they never asked me for this, or they haven't processed that you've asked them that. So it kind of helps things move a bit quicker, even though I know it can feel a bit longer to be like, well, we'll go back to the school, but that's what we tend to advise.
We're getting lots of compliments in the chat, just to share that. But it's been very useful to people, so I'll duck out. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for that, Tina. Yeah, we've got to 9 o'clock really quickly. There are lots of positive feedback in the comments. A poll will pop up on your screen any moment now with some very quick questions. It's 3 questions, literally 3 seconds to click the boxes. This poll will give us instant feedback, so we can see right now what your thoughts and feelings are about this session, and we'll also take the comments for the chat. The evaluation form that we also have will give is an opportunity to write some words down if you want to say a bit more. So please take the opportunity to do that. We really appreciate the feedback, as it either means we do more of this or we do something else. But I do want to take the opportunity again to say thank you so much to Hannah and Ellen for a brilliant information session about Enquire and all the kind of legislation about our rights as parents and our children's rights as well. Lots of information there about how to contact Enquire. We're here also for our parent group members, and if you're interested as a parent group in becoming a member, you can also contact us. We can send that out. But yeah, I think perhaps there's another session to come in the future for us to come together again and work in partnership again. I just wanted to say, thank you so much for all the brilliant questions. Thank you for everybody sharing their kind of their situations and put that out there for Hannah and Ellen to answer. And I suppose there's been a bit of a learning opportunity for everybody with you all doing that. So yeah, thank you so much again. The last few slides here are just the information from Connect. You'll receive that, and all these live links will be available. And as I say, it's just the evaluation form. But otherwise, it's just want to wish everybody a lovely evening, to say good night to you all. Thank you so much again for a great session, and I really hope to see you all soon in the near future in whatever form that may be, through our website or through our social media channels. And I'm sure Enquire will want to see the same. So thanks everybody. Good night.
Cheers, bye.
Thanks, good night.